Smartabase system infrastructure and organization of the institutional level system. So our Smartabase system is set up in a hierarchical like fashion, and that's going to allow us to control access to different points of the system. It's also going to allow us to protect our data and information that may be really secure or important to remain secure for each individual athlete. This could be HIPAA data, it could be FERPA data, anything that we need to make sure we control access to specific individuals that use the system. This is an example hierarchy that Smartabase uses within their courses that shows how we can do this. So you have essentially, in this fictitious example, you have a National Sports Institute. Then within this, maybe this is an NGB, a national governing body. You have different sports within that system. And then within a specific sport, you have different levels. So at the national level, the developmental level, and the junior level, and then even further striated by both men's and women's level sports. Okay. Within our system at Penn State, we have Penn State University as the organizational level. Penn State University Athletics is our NGB, our national governing body. Now, within this, our system also has two branches. We have the electronic medical record system, and we have the athlete management system. Okay, the electronic medical record is going to be called the EMR. The athlete management system is called the AMS. There's a lot of positives when you put the two together. We can have the ability to cross over information. We can start to merge performance data with medical data. We can start to see long-term trends between the two. And then it removes the need for professionals that operate across both information streams. It prevents them from having to go to two different technology platforms. So we're under one different area, Smartabase, PSU Athletics, and we can see that information on the same platform. Now, the important thing, and you'll see how I kind of mentioned that earlier, is breaking things up and controlling access. Smartabase allows us to essentially build a fence between our EMR and our AMS. So we are competing and using information. We're all in the same field, if you will, but there's a fence that we control who has access to go on what side of the fence. So our healthcare providers, our medical professionals in athletic training, sports med, people on that side will have the ability to see health-related data that's really special, really protected for the athletes. Whereas our coaches, our staff that don't necessarily need to see that information, we will have access to performance data only. Now, there's times where professionals may have access to both. There may be times that we de-identify data and start to merge things together to see long-term trends over time. But the important thing here is we have the ability to control access between the EMR data and the AMS data within Smartabase. So our general infrastructure and how we have set up our system is our organizational account is our Penn State Athletics organization. Then we have groups. Our groups are organized into sports. So in this example, we have baseball, we have softball, the individual sports. Then you'll see the small areas here. I represents incoming athletes. These are athletes that are coming into the system, being onboarded through the medical process, but they're not currently active on a roster. C represents current athletes. Okay, so these athletes move and matriculate through the process from being an incoming athlete to a current athlete. And then finally, the last piece of the life cycle of the athlete within the Smartabase system is the A, the archive. So athlete graduates, athlete leaves school and goes to a professional organization, athlete transfers to keep their information and data secure, but also to maintain the fidelity of that information. If we need to recall it quickly, we will move them from current to archived. Now, over time, for certain sports that have a professional league, and maybe we have an athlete that comes back and trains with us, we may create a P category for professional athletes. That may be an intermediary between current and archived, but we do not have that set up in the system yet. So in this case right here, you have baseball and softball, analogous sports, men and women's sides, but different names. So this is how we have it set up now. For teams that have both men's and women's sports under the same parent name, for example, ice hockey or volleyball, we have our system set up so that you have the parent organization ice hockey, then you have men, then you have the women, and then you have the same subgroups, incoming, current, archived. So now, dependent on who is working with each organization, we can control, with each group, we can control who has access to what group or team. So if I'm a strength and conditioning coach and I work with softball and volleyball, we can control access to that individual having only access to softball and hockey within the system. Even further, we can control access and only give permission to see current athletes in this case, or if somebody that is just onboarding and needs access to incoming athletes, we can control access because we have this hierarchy set up really, really smoothly. Within the system, we've already put out a video on how to toggle between teams on the system, on a computer, and also on a cell phone. But to get to this screen, you're going to come up here to the top right-hand corner and you'll see your sports. If you click on that sport, in this case, football current, it will bring you to this page where you can click on the specific sport. Now, only the sports that the individual has access to will appear here. Then they can drill into that specific sport, the specific subgroups within the sport, and then they will load up that profile. So in this case, we have a group, which is our team. We have coaches. Okay, so coaches are going to be individuals that have access to manage athletes, which is the lowest level of the hierarchy. Okay, and one important note to point out here too, a coach in this sense does not necessarily have to be an on the field coach or a strength and conditioning coach. It relates to anybody that manages groups of athletes, so the lowest subgroup. So think about coach as one level up from the bottom of being an athlete, where I can only see and interact with my own data. Coaches can interact with the team or group's data, okay, or the individual athlete's data. So in this case, we have coaches, we have support staff within strength and conditioning coaches, doctors, physios, your sports science crew could come in here, your dietitians could come in here. Anybody in the system can be allocated as a coach that manages athletes. Roles. I mentioned roles being the point in which we can control access based upon privilege or need. Okay, so what we do is we are going to set up specific roles for specific personnel. So let's just look at athletes because we've already discussed this. Athletes that are athlete archive will certainly no longer be at Penn State University, but they don't need access to much of their information, essentially virtually no information. So their roles would have minimal permissions or system and data permissions within the system. They don't need to put in information. They don't need to view information unless something comes up later on down the line. Athletes that are current, their role in this sense here, that role would be set up so that athletes can input information against their own profile, only their own profile, and they can view select information against only their profile. Athletes that are incoming may have access to enter only information on one area. So they may be able to input information only on the electronic medical record, the EMR side. Maybe that's for athlete intake. Maybe that's for testing. There's a lot of different ways, but essentially you can see how we can control access to the system by assigning roles to individuals that have access to the system. In here, we have coach roles, that they have the ability to visualize specific sets of information for athletes. We have athletic performance roles. So these individuals will have the ability to access specific things pertinent to being an athletic performance coach, all the way down to sports medicine, medical, anything like that. We have the ability to control access by managing what roles each individual person has. Groups. We already mentioned how our sports are our categories in groups. This is just going to show us how we have our groups set up. We have organizational level groups like athletic training. We have sport groups like baseball, archived, current, and incoming. Another point I should bring up too is there is a group called baseball or basketball, and then we have subgroups which are archived, current, and incoming. So we can really quickly give access to all of baseball by toggling on baseball, and the individual would have access to all three: archived, incoming, and current. We can do that across all of our sports. So essentially, you have the parent, which is baseball, and the child accounts: archived, current, and incoming. And then we have people, and we're obviously going to blank out all of our names here, but people in this sense are any user that uses the system. It could be a coach, like a strength and conditioning coach, a sport coach. It could be an administrator. It could be an intern. It could be an athlete. In this sense, our people are the users at the most granular level of the system. And then they have access and roles assigned to them. They have groups assigned to them. And then it really controls access for what we're doing. So in review, the organization is the institutional level system. It's Penn State Athletics that we have two sides. We have the EMR and we have the AMS. Roles get assigned to people, and it gives us specific permissions in the system. There's two different types of permissions. There are systems permissions that are essentially like the access that I have to different features on the system, like messaging, like calendar, like use of the sidebar, toggling. And then there's data permissions. So as a strength conditioning coach, I would have data permissions for performance related data, but I would not have data permissions for medical data. Okay, so data permissions can be applied to both event forms, so data entry, and it can be applied to visualizations, how I view data. Groups are essentially team units: baseball, lacrosse, wrestling, swimming, and diving. Those are our groups. People are users who can access the application. It doesn't matter who or what area the person comes from, if they're an athlete, if they're a sport coach, if they're a physio, whatever it is. Each user within the system is categorized as people. A coach is an individual, a person that has the ability to manage athletes. So one step above the bottom layer of the hierarchy, and athletes are the lowest level, the lowest component of the hierarchy, and that's an individual athlete that is managed by a coach. Basic introduction to Smartabase infrastructure and how we have everything set up from a permissions-based stance.